Welcome to this EFRAG outreach event on sustainability reporting. This is a recording of the materials that have been presented during our event on the 15th of June and highlights the main topics that we discussed and presented on that day. So as I mentioned, we had a hybrid outreach event aimed to providing both knowledge about the new standards, but also to obtain input from the participants and feedback as part of the current ongoing consultation process. The objective of this recording is to share with you the key topics that were discussed and that were presented on, so that you have in a kind of 1 hour slot an overview of the key points that we discussed, both on the developments in the CSRD as well as the ESRS that I will be talking about later on. All of these presentations and the content is on a personal view basis and is based on the status of developments as at the 15th of June 2022. So what we will be talking about, first of all, I will give a brief presentation about the CSRD and the ESRS, and then we'll also have a presentation of the chair of the project task force by Patrick de Cambour. After that, we will have presentations on the two cross-cutting standards, ESRS 1 and ESRS 2. During the event, we also had further breakout sessions in respect of environment, social and governance. We will address the highlights of these standards also as part of this recording. Further information about especially Q&As that were asked during our outreach event are available in written format on our website and can be read for further detail. So first of all, 40 years of reporting in the Netherlands. And let's introduce myself a little bit further as well. I am Gerard van Santen and I'm the chair of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, the Raad voor, Jaarverslaggeving. And it's always good, before you start with something new, to have a little bit of a look back on where are we coming from. The Dutch Accounting Standards Board was actually set up in 1981. And that also means that in last September, we actually celebrated our 40th year anniversary of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board. Unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't really the possibility to organize any events. So therefore, it's really great that now in June 2022, we have been able to host this hybrid outreach event with the current developments on sustainability reporting. If we then go back a little bit further in history, then the first guidelines on financial reporting were published by the Dutch Accounting Standards Board in 1982. But about 20 years later, we were also one of the first ones that actually published a guide to sustainability reporting, our handreiking maatschappelijke verslaggeving. At that point in time, also from our stakeholders, sustainability and especially sustainability reporting was already a topic on the agenda. If we then see that in 2005, the EU implemented IFRS for listed entities, and that's about 20 years after we started with our first financial reporting guidelines, we see now a similar development that also the EU is now developing its sustainability reporting requirements about 20 years after we had also developed our first guide to sustainability reporting. That doesn't mean that we were the ones that invited sustainability reporting, because there are a lot of other parties involved in that as well, but it is to give you an impression of how the developments were in recent years. Of course, in 2017, the non-financial reporting directive was already implemented, but that only applied to a certain listed entities, while what we're going to discuss today on the CSRD and the ESRS is going to be applicable for a much wider group and is also broader if we look at the content. But this is a little bit to give an historic perspective over the past 40 years. Now we're going to a video message from Sven Gentner, the head of the unit of corporate reporting in the European Commission, who's going to explain about the CSRD.
Hello and welcome to your local EFRAG outreach event. My name is Sven Gentner and I'm head of unit for corporate reporting in the European Commission. EFRAG has kindly invited me to say a few words on the context of today's event. As you all know, over the past 5 years, sustainability has moved from the margins to the mainstream with astonishing speed. It is now at the heart of commercial affairs and at the heart of finance. Financial markets are crucial for our transition to a more sustainable and climate-neutral economy. This is why the European Commission proposed the Directive on Corporate Sustainability Reporting, the CSRD, in June of 2021. The objectives of the CSRD are to reduce systemic risk to the financial system arising from climate change and other sustainability issues, to make capital flow to companies that address and do not aggravate the sustainability crisis more easy, and to make companies more accountable for their impacts on people and the environment. Our two watchwords for this proposal were clarity and coherence. First, markets and businesses need more clarity. Today, there is no standard for disclosing sustainability information. By developing European sustainability disclosure standards, we can build consensus on what information investors, NGOs, and other stakeholders can demand from companies. Second, markets and businesses also need coherence. Coherence means that economic activities need to align with the goals described in the European Green Deal and confirmed in the European climate law. We need a strong alignment between the disclosure standards for issuers, the taxonomy indicators, and indicators that are being used by financial market participants. To allow investors to get the full picture, they need to know both a company's risk exposure and its impacts on people and the environment. That is the principle of double materiality. The risk of greenwashing can seriously undermine investor confidence, whereas high-quality reporting on companies' impacts on society and the environment is key to fostering trust in sustainable investment products. Of course, consistency within the EU is important, but it is not enough. We also need as much global alignment as possible, which requires constructive engagement from all sides. The Commission and EFRAG are engaging actively with the ISSB and with other bodies from other jurisdictions. Finally, a few words on process. We hope that the negotiations between the European Parliament, the Council, and the European Commission on the CSRD can be finalized this month. Nevertheless, in line with the urgency of this topic, the development of the sustainability reporting standards called for by the CSRD has already progressed very far. EFRAG's project task force started its work in 2021, and a public consultation on the draft standards is now open until the 8th of August of this year. The drafts that will be presented to you today are the result of a substantial amount of work by a large group of different stakeholders and experts. The European Commission is very grateful to the project task force and to EFRAG for the excellent work done over the last year. It is now very important that all relevant stakeholders' views are considered to obtain reporting standards that are fit for purpose. I'm glad that EFRAG is organizing a large number of events to allow stakeholders to give their feedback on the draft standards. Please do make your views heard and do participate in the public consultation. Once EFRAG has considered all the input to the public consultation and finalized the draft standards, it will be for the European Commission to turn them into European law. We all know that this project has been and will remain challenging, but we should not forget that it is an important part of Europe's answer to a pressing real-world problem. Without the force of financial markets, we will not be able to meet our climate and sustainability goals. I would like to thank you for participating in today's event and for giving us your important input on the draft sustainability reporting standards.
This video was very interesting from Sven, and I've summarized some of his key messages. Because he explained on why did the European Commission take the initiative on the CSRD, what it aims to achieve, and where they are in certain elements of the process. But what I would like to reiterate is the CSRD objectives. And that is not that reporting is a goal by itself, but the reporting is a mean to achieve the broader goals of the EU in respect of its European Green Deal. And to kind of repeat the three main objectives is first of all to reduce the systematic risk to the financial system, especially related to climate change and sustainability issues, to make capital flow to companies that focus on improving sustainability, and to make companies more accountable for the impact on people and environment. As he also mentioned, the consultation is currently still going on. The final deadline for that is the 8th of August, and it's really relevant there that the ESRS are ultimately made fit for purpose. And therefore it's very important to make also your views heard as part of this public consultation. Well, we have already obtained live feedback during our live outreach event, but you can also still provide feedback through the online survey that's available on the EFRAG website. But you can also directly approach the Dutch Accounting Standards Board if you have any feedback, and we will incorporate that into our process, as at this moment we are still working on our comment letter in that perspective. And ultimately a main message from also Sven's video that I would like to repeat. It's a challenging project, but we should not forget that it's an important part of Europe's answer to a pressing real-world problem. And without the force of the financial market and effectively having the capital invested into sustainable activities, it will not be possible to meet our climate and sustainability goals. And that's ultimately really what we want to achieve, or what the EU wants to achieve with this development. If I then give a very high-level overview of the scope of the CSRD, and as I mentioned, this recording is based on the situation as per the 15th of June, and at that moment the trilogue discussions between the European Parliament, European Council and the European Member States are still going on and still need to be finalized. But what will the CSRD contain? Effectively the requirement to include a sustainability report as part of the director's report. It needs to be in compliance with the CSRD, that's the level 1 guidance, and the ESRS, which is the level 2 more detailed guidance, and limited assurance is expected by the external assurance provider or the auditor. And a key concept is really that it is about double materiality. So the reporting is both about what's the impact of sustainability matters on the company, but especially also what's the impact by the company on sustainability matters. To whom will this reporting apply? Effectively to all listed entities with a few minor exemptions, but additionally also to any large corporates who at least meet 2 of the 3 following criteria as mentioned on the slides, and these criteria are effectively the same as when you need to determine for financial reporting purposes whether you qualify as a large entity. So these criteria are comparable in that perspective. Additionally, there will also be certain group exemptions. For the details on the group exemptions, that still needs to be worked out, and that will be in the final CSRD. But on a very high level, some of these exemptions will be similar to the group exemptions that we're familiar with for financial reporting purposes. Based on the latest information, we're expecting that for the listed entities to which the NRVD currently also applies, need to report over the financial year 2024, and that's effectively the same scope for the NRVD, and that all other large entities will need to report over the financial year 2025. And that means, for example, when I'm talking about the financial year 2025, that will be the report that will be published in the first half of 2026. So still some time to go, but also an awful lot of amount of work to be done to make these deadlines. Then it's good to briefly talk about who sets the standards for sustainability reporting. I already mentioned the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that's effectively the level 1 guidance. That is set by the European Commission, after approval also by the European Parliament and Member States. And then also the European Commission will ultimately approve the European Sustainability Reporting Standards that will set out in more detail how you need to prepare your sustainability report. However, the Commission has asked EFRAG to actually prepare those ESRS as an advice. EFRAG is a public-private partnership with European stakeholder organizations like Business Europe, Accountancy Europe, EFAS, so also representing investors, the national standard setters like the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, but also NGOs, trade unions, academics, and effectively the wider public. And that also relates because we are talking about double materiality. Finally, there are also observers like the Commission itself, ESMA, the ECB, etc. And ultimately, EFRAG will issue an advice to the Commission on these sustainability reporting standards. EFRAG is, technically speaking, an acronym of the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, but clearly this is about non-financial reporting, so we'll just refer to that as EFRAG. Then finally, what's the Dutch participation in EFRAG? I already mentioned that we are one of the member organizations of EFRAG and really contributing to that. We have specific Dutch board members. One of them is Simon Braaksma, also one of the presenters of this recording, representing the Dutch Accounting Standards Board. But for example, also Wim Bartels from Accountancy Europe and David Vermeijs from Shift as NGO. We also have Dutch representatives in the technical expert group of EFRAG, Alexandra van Selm from the SER, and there are many other Dutch participants at EFRAG and PTF level. So that really helps in also providing the Dutch perspective and the Dutch input in the preparing these standards. Then what are based on the current situation the main provisions of the draft CSRD? And that's effectively an overall set of reporting topics covering the three main ESG topics. So overall that means that in respect of these topics, disclosure needs to be provided about the business model and strategy, what are sustainability objectives, what's the progress, what are actions, policies in place, and also to actually report on what are the actual results, what are the indicators being used from a double materiality perspective. And also when you look at the time horizon, it's about also the short period, so let's say the next 1 or 2 years, medium 2 to 5 years, but also the long-term perspective, so that's up to 10 or 20 years. And it's not only about the entity itself, but it's also about the value chain. So that can mean suppliers, customers, also they need to be integrated in certain aspects in the reporting, so it's broader about the value chain. And then this all needs to be provided about 3 main topics. So the E from environment, the S from social, and the G from governance. And we'll talk more about those 3 topics later on in this presentation. Just then to have a brief overview of the exposure draft ESRS, effectively 13 standards, where we have 2 cross-cutting standards, then 5 standards on environment, 4 on social, 2 on governance, and a number of appendices that are providing additional information and guidance. And by now also the basis of conclusions have been published that are related to each of these standards. But it's especially to see there's an overall cross-cutting perspective and then environment, social and governance. In this recording we will also address that and we'll also show this picture a couple of times. And before we're going into that detail ourselves, it is great to also have Patrick de Cambour here. He's the chair of the project task force, first on non-financial reporting and then on developing the draft ESRS. And he's also one of the members of the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board. And he will present about how EFRAG, and especially the project task force, has developed the draft standards and what the main challenges, opportunities, but also the area of feedback that he is looking for.
It is my pleasure to be with you today to present the overall process and architecture of the European sustainability reporting standards. Next slide, please. Next, this is a classical disclaimer. So the process to start with. We had the possibility to work in the PTF for 11 months in project mode. You might remember that when the Commission tabled the CSRD proposal, then on April 21, it was soon realized that the ambition required in terms of timing, required the draft standards to be ready very quickly. So we received a request from Commissioner McGuinness in May 2021 to start elaborating draft standards in project mode as soon as possible. So we relaunched the task force that had been operating before to conduct preparatory work in June 2021. So 35 members from 13 different member states, supported by a secretariat of about 30 full-time equivalents, and also the input of expert working groups. We also signed a statement of cooperation, with GRI, Shift, Wiki, and we entertained a regular dialogue with the EFRAG Foundation, to start with the TRWG and then with the ISSB. And we had also a couple of meetings with the SEC, which was preparing the consultation that we know. So until Christmas, we prepared working papers on the basis of clusters. And these papers have been made publicly available. They were raw materials, so we have to be careful not to take that as a key element, because they were really modified during the first quarter of 2022, under what we call the triple review process. Triple review process means, first of all, a consensus building at the PTF level as a whole, where we had many sessions to discuss the content of the working papers in order to improve them. We also submitted the working papers to a review panel, and we asked the expert working groups for their input. At the same time, we were also receiving feedback from the European Commission DGs, and also feedback from the public authorities contributing to the PTF as observers. All of this led us to the final wrap-up meeting of the PTF on April 25 and 26, during which we approved the EDs on a no objection basis, and we transferred them to the Sustainability Reporting Board, which decided to launch the public consultation after having fine-tuned the cover note and also the questions to be asked from respondents. So the public consultation was launched at the end of April 2022. Next slide, please. What's going to happen, or what is happening now? First of all, we published the basis for conclusions, which is a supporting document which will not be adopted via delegated acts at the end of May, as planned. We have organized the public consultation for 100 days, i.e. with the due date, which is August 2022. And we encourage, of course, respondents to as many respondents as possible to consider, because we are very interested by the input and the feedback we receive through the public consultation. We are organizing outreach events, or at least we are co-organizing, as it is the case for the Netherlands, and about about 12 to 15 outreach events are organized in geographies and also in by stakeholder groups, by EFRAG, in order to, one, facilitate the understanding of the EDs, and two, receive feedback. So following the public consultation, there will be an analysis conducted during the month of August, and the EFRAG TEG and Sustainability Reporting Board will have to re-deliberate between early September until mid-November, because this is the target date which has been given to us by the Commission. Following that handover to the Commission as technical advice of the draft standards, they have to conduct their own process, which is taking into account, first of all, the consultation period with the European agencies, translation into 24 languages, and also the scrutiny period of the co-legislators, Parliament and Council, because the goal is to publish the standards by the end of the first half of 2023. Next slide. So that's the project mode. And now the institutional mode. What are the key features that have to be borne in mind when considering the exposure drafts? First of all, they will have to be adjusted to meet the requirements of the final CSRD once the CSRD has been adopted by the co-legislators, hopefully before the end of June. Two, the key point, we have tried to create a cohesive and coherent environment for reporting by taking into account existing European laws and initiatives such as SFDR, taxonomy, Article 8, but also the other ones, the other legislations, and there are many, including the proposed corporate sustainability due diligence directive, which is not final, of course, so we have been careful, but we also wanted to pave the way in a reasonable manner. The third point, which I would like to highlight, is, of course, our desire and commitment to build on and contribute to the international sustainability reporting initiatives. I mentioned the statement of cooperation. I mentioned also the dialogue with the ISSB or the SEC. The architecture is designed, and that needs to be understood, to articulate properly sustainability information, the reported sustainability information. So I will explain a little bit more. We, of course, are under the umbrella of the CSRD. Level 1, i.e. the legislative level, is of course to be complied with. So we had to address the sustainability matters which are covered by Article 19b of the CSRD, and which is not under discussion in the trilogue. The core elements of the content are not really challenged. Last but not least, 2 points. This is the first step in a journey towards a faithful representation, because as you are aware, there will be other sets, in particular a second set that will address the reporting for SMEs and the reporting for large entities under a sector-specific dimension. And second point, we certainly hope to receive a fruitful feedback from the public consultation to fine-tune the relevance of the disclosures that we suggest, and to promote and foster comparability to the maximum extent possible. But we also want to know if there are prioritization or phasing in options that are coming from the consultation, because this is a key point for us. Next slide. The architecture which you will consider during the outreach, is composed of 13 standards, 2 cross-cutting standards, addressing the principles, which we call the overall umbrella, and also the cross-cutting disclosures, because we realized, of course, that certain disclosures need to be absolutely cross-cutting, like, for instance, the interaction between sustainability matters and strategy and business models, the interaction between sustainability matters and governance, and also, as a pivotal element, the assessment of impacts, risks, and opportunities, processes, and outcome of the processes. So under these cross-cutting standards, we developed at PTF level 3 categories of topical standards as required by the PTF, 5 for environment, following, the classification which is proposed by the taxonomy, climate, mitigation and adaptation, water, pollution, biodiversity, and circular economy. For social, 4 standards, 1 dedicated to the own workforce, 1 dedicated to the workforce in the value chain, and 1 to the affected communities, and 1 to the end users and consumers. And on governance, 1 on general governance and 1 on business conduct. So this architecture is trying to structure properly the reporting, which the EU is considering as a second pillar of standardized corporate reporting in connectivity with financial reporting. Next slide. The main success factors are that we have tried to foster are the following. The first one is, of course, we focused on the quality of information, in particular relevance and sector agnostic comparability, because we certainly want to promote the end of the alphabet soup and the lack of reliability of sustainability data. The second point, we wanted absolutely to create a coherence within the EU between the various policy objectives and regulations in terms of content and timing. We also wanted to pave the way to the compatibility with international initiatives, whatever their stage of evolution. We also felt that it was necessary to promote the exercise of judgment by the reporting entity under the control of its governance and its auditors to foster a proportionate implementation. This is a point that is sometimes misunderstood, but where I think you will need to consider carefully what would be the alternatives. Of course, a balanced combination between narrative and quantitative, because unlike financial reporting, narrative information is key in sustainability reporting. We do not have the luxury of a quantitative system that is perfect, with debits equal to credits. And we have to explain, we have to consider various units of accounts, and therefore narrative information and narrative with quantitative information are key. Of course, a seamless standardized corporate reporting between financial and sustainability is one of our goals. And finally, for at least in the first step, we feel that the presentation had to be flexible. So that's why we have 3 options for the sustainability statements, and we consider that it is possible to incorporate by reference. Sometimes it's tricky, but we feel that we need to offer this flexibility. Next slide, please. In terms of challenges, we of course realize that it can be a real challenge for first-time reporters. and in particular the ones, yes, of course, that were not in the NFRD. And so the criteria for large is relatively low in the EU, and therefore there is a host of entities that will report for the first time. We also are not fully sure that we have reached the right depth in terms of required information, and that's why we are, of course, open to fine-tune or phase in. I insist on the challenge of fully addressing the assessment of material impacts, risks, and opportunities, and also to understand the use of the rebuttable presumption, which is a classical, by the way, tool between standard setting and implementation of standards, in particular in financial reporting. So we felt that it's a possibility, but we understand that it's not easy to understand or to implement. So we would like to receive feedback on that. This is a challenge. Boundaries are also an issue because, of course, we go beyond the perimeter of financial reporting. In doing so, EFRAG has to navigate between the expectations of stakeholders. Some want more, some want less. Users want, in general, more. Preparers are also careful for cost considerations. So we have to navigate in between to reach, in the EFRAG spirit, a reasonable consensus. And last but not least, we want to avoid multiple reportings at all cost, but not at the cost of reducing meaningfulness. So a brief word on the consultation. Next slide, please. First of all, there are 3 sections in the consultation, and this is important to understand. The first one is dedicated to the relevance. We ask questions about the relevance of the proposed architecture, the implementation of the principles, and the overall content of the 13 exposure drafts. This is relatively high level, but this is key. The second section is dedicated to the possible options for prioritizing or phasing in the implementation. And we needed also a third section, which is, of course, the one that is heavy, which is feedback on the disclosure requirements. Since there are 137 disclosure requirements, it looks very heavy. And that's why we encourage respondents to consider section 1 and section 2, and to be selective if they so wish to answer section 3. Thank you very much for your attention and for your invitation. Thank you.
Okay, I think Patrick gave a very insightful overview of how the draft ESRS were developed and what the main challenges and focus areas are. He also talked about what the specific feedback areas are from an EFRAG perspective. And you can see them here on the slide again, and I'm not going to repeat them. What I would like to focus on is on a few topics where the Dutch Accounting Standards Board is specifically focusing on. First of all, that's improving and focusing on a holistic approach of the draft ESRS. So really looking at the picture overall. And aiming at connectivity with financial and other corporate reporting, as well as, and that's the second point, alignment with international standards. That's really key because to prevent multiple reporting. The third topic is really to focusing on and further understanding materiality approach, because we really believe that the reporting should be focusing on material topics and should not be overburdened by immaterial topics. The fourth topic is what's the trickle-down effect are going to be for small and medium-sized entities. As I mentioned, the scope relates to listed and large entities. However, since the value chain is also included, it may also impact SMEs. And that's an area of focus of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board. And finally, how the complexity of the standards can be reduced as much as possible to enable the workability of the ESRS in practice, and so that we really have high quality reporting at a reasonable cost and effort in that perspective. After this general introduction of the CSRD and the ESRS, we are now going to the second session, and that's on the cross-cutting standards ESRS 1 and 2. And that will be presented by Simon Braaksma. He's the co-chair of the Sustainability Working Group of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, but he's also a member of the Sustainability Reporting Board and working at Philips and has a broad experience in sustainability reporting. And the other presenter will be Olga Smirnova, also a co-chair of the Sustainability Working Group of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board and working on sustainability reporting at Heineken.
So thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Patrick. And thanks for all the introductions that we've seen so far. By the way, also thanks to Sven in the DG in Brussels. You've been hearing a lot about the whole process that EFRAG has been going through and how they came to the specific standards. So we think it's now time to take you by the hand and really dive into a little bit more depth. And what we will be starting with is the first two cross-cutting standards, ESRS 1 and 2. And both Olga and myself will be doing that, but maybe Olga, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Olga Smirnova. I'm responsible for sustainability reporting in Heineken and auditor in the past. Also a member of the Sustainability Reporting Working Group at the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, together with Simon. So here to present you ESRS 1, ESRS 2.
And we in the Dutch Accounting Standards Boards have been reviewing the draft standards and now also the exposure drafts. So we hope to share a little bit of our views with you as we are going through the presentation. And first of all, an overview, and you should be able to draft this one after a couple of occasions because this slide is coming back time and again. And basically what you see at the top of the slide are the two cross-cutting standards that Olga and myself will be talking about first. Then you see the next level, a number of environmental standards. There are 5 in total. There are 4 social standards and then 2 governance standards. But the first session that we are now doing is focused on the 2 standards. I will be doing ESRS 1 and Olga will be doing ESRS 2. So cross-cutting standards, general principles. And what is important, I think, for all of you is that also the standards that we will be presenting have a layered approach, basically. And the first layer, and that is what you will see here, is company agnostic. And that basically means they apply to every company. Then, secondly, EFRAG will be developing, upon the request of the Commission, sector-specific standards. And lastly, you can, as a company, disclose entity-specific information, and that is what is called the rule of 3. So first, sector agnostic, it applies to everybody. Then stuff that will apply, or disclosure requirements that apply to your specific industry. And lastly, entity specifics. So what you will see on this slide is a number of key elements, key principles that apply to all the standards that you will be seeing later today. So first of all, there's an alignment, of course, with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. There are specific sector agnostic and entity specific disclosures, sector agnostic and specific standards. And lastly, there is a specific detail in the standard the first standard, the ESRS 1, that gives you a lot of detailed disclosures that you normally have. If you compare to your financial disclosures, you have that in the financial statements that talk about the scope, the boundaries, and what have you. I'll come to that in a moment in a little bit more detail. So an important element, and I think that is very important for all of you to understand. We have heard earlier from a number of academics who did investigate the disclosures and the assurance that is being provided with listed companies, and there about 50% of the listed companies in the year 2021 had assurance on their non-financial reporting, only 50% for listed companies. Well, whether you call it good or bad news, basically the Commission also expects or demands basically that there will be assurance on all the ESG disclosures. So that is very important for you to know. So, and with that comes a lot of responsibility, because yes, you can have, just information that you throw over to the accountant and ask them to provide assurance on that, but that will be a very burdensome and, uneconomical way of working. It really means that you don't only need to have the data, you also need to have internal controls, you need to have policies, standards, and what have you, and that comes with all of that that is being included in the ESRS 1 standard. Another very important topic apart from the assurance, and the assurance, by the way, is at limited level. So it's not the highest reasonable assurance, but it's limited. But still, if I say that today only 50% of listed companies have that, you better start engaging with your accountant in a timely manner what that all means for you, because it is a big impact. A second very important element here is about double materiality. And maybe, Olga, you can shed a little bit of light. It is covered in ESRS 2, but maybe now that it's on the slide, you can dwell on this for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Materiality, double materiality in particular, is the concept introduced in ESRS, and it is going as a red thread through the entire set of standards, and ESRS 1 and 2 speak about it, 2 in much more detail. So this is very important and a core concept of the entire set of the standards. Double materiality means that all the preparers need to assess what information is considered to be material and disclose it. So you need to make an assessment, looking at your environment you operate, talking to your stakeholders, both internal and external, and assess what topics are material. But important point, it's a double materiality. We look at impact from both angles, whether it's impact of the company on the external environment, or whether it's how the external environment is impacting the company, the preparer or undertaking, using terminology of the standards. And this is a very important concept because all companies, actually preparers in the beginning, but afterwards users, need to look from both angles when they decide what standards are material for them and hence disclosed, or if the entire standard is applicable, perhaps individual articles and disclosure requirements can be taken out because they are of less materiality. Preparers need to explain it as well, and here we talk to another important concept introduced in the standards, which is rebuttable presumption. Rebuttable presumption means that preparers have to explain and provide evidence first to, well, themselves, then assurance providers and to the external world, the stakeholders and users of the information, on why particular elements have been excluded from the scope based on materiality assessment. And this is a very important point which we would like to attract your attention. Please read the standard in detail and also provide your comments, of course, if you would like, in the consultation which is being in process now. But these are underlying principles of the entire set of standards, and we find them extremely important.
Yeah. And maybe just to add my 2 cents, what it means is basically that the premise is, the working assumption, all the standards are applicable to everybody, notwithstanding the results of your materiality assessment. So if you are a temp agency and, for example, pollution is hopefully not, a material topic to you, according to the rebutable presumption, you need to prove really that it's not material, even if it doesn't appear in your materiality analysis as material. You still need to go through that effort. And then also write this down, because also the standard says that you really need to give all the details in your management report why something is not material, and you make use of the rebutable presumption.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that is a very important topic that you need to consider really, and you may agree or disagree. Anyhow, we are looking for your feedback on this topic because it's a really important principle that you need to consider. Let's then move over to the next topic, and that is boundaries and value chain. That's basically the third topic that is very relevant for you, because what the standard says is it isn't only about, in my case, Philips, it is also the supply chain, and basically not specifically to ESRS 1, but later when we look at the climate standard, for example, also the use phase of our products. So we call that scope 3, but we'll come to that in a bit. But what is really important is that the boundaries basically extend to the value chain. And there should be a complete alignment with, for example, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. But whether that is fully aligned or not yet, that is to be seen. But very important for you, if you talk about later, for example, the workers, there's also a standard that talks about the conditions for the workers in the supply chain. And that is a significant extension to what we have in many of the disclosures today. With regard to the time horizon, very simple, because if you report financially over the year, starting in the 1st of January till the 31st of December, no surprise that also the ESG information should be on the 1st of January to the 31st of December. And then, of course, due diligence already mentioned, and the link to the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. You know, there's a lot, you cannot just write down without having a good underpinning. There should be sufficient due diligence being performed by the company. Now, Olga already referred to the concept of double materiality, so I won't dwell too much on it, but very important, you know, the impact of you, your society on the company, as well as you on society at large. So that is very important to understand. And here we see it again, and the topic of the rebutable presumption that Olga already dwelt on. Double materiality, again, a number of specific steps here. And then you come also to the entity-specific disclosures that I referred to in the beginning, and in the end you've got the material disclosure requirements for the undertaking. So it's the concept of, or the principle of three that was mentioned. As I already alluded to, the value chain, here you see it again visualized in the slide. So it's basically, you know, my own company and all the consolidated entities that are in scope, but then also the impact, risk and opportunities in both the supply chain as well as in the downstream value chain. And of course, you know, you cannot report without having policies, procedures and systems in place and internal controls in order to keep your assurance cost a little bit to a manageable level. So there needs to be a lot of work done by all of you if you haven't started it. And I think that is the key message that Olga and myself, but also the other speakers, convey to you. You know, this is very impactful, so better start, you know, understanding what is written down in the exposure drafts. They are, you know, not the final version, but they're exposure drafts asking for comments by all of you. So please read them and start also, you know, gathering people in your organization, involve more people. If you look, for example, at the governance standard that will be dwelt on by Eva a little bit later, you know, you need to get your legal folks involved. If you're talking about impact in the supply chain, you know, you need to get your supply chain colleagues really involved. So that is important. You cannot do that just by a couple of people in finance or in the sustainability team. It's basically a big team effort, and also only by that token it's manageable because it's a lot of work. Lastly, before I hand over to Olga, is the presentation. And Patrick said already in his words that there is a basically a number of options provided, and they're here on the slide, in fact under 6.2. First of all, you can have a separate single identifiable section. So you could imagine that you've got your report, and then there is a chapter that says ESG. And in that, you've got everything that is being described in the requirements, the disclosure requirements have there. What you can also do is have 4 separate identifiable aspects where you've got the cross-cutting standards, the E, S, and G. But what you also can do, and that is, I think, will be completely illegible, but it's an option. It basically says report per standard, and then you get, you know, everything that is on the cross-cutting again, but then E, you know, and all the different disclosure requirements of every individual standard, then the S and the G. It may suit your purpose. It's good, I think, that EFRAG and the Commission are not that prescriptive. They give a little bit of flexibility. But the key message that we want to give to you, and something to consider as well, is that today the assumption is that everything that you're disclosing will be part of the management report. So we already did some assessments as to the inflation in the number of pages that you have. Please also, when you're reading those standards, keep that in the back of your mind. Do a gap analysis, but also think about what it will mean to you. And then, do you agree with the, you know, the position of EFRAG at this moment in the standards that it all should be part of the management report? Or should you maybe have this more aligned with financial reporting, where you've got your management disclosure and analysis, you know, a description of how the year went and some highlights, and then financial statements that give all the details of the P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, equity schedule, and what have you. So it's really up to you to have an opinion on that, but please give that feedback to us as well, because we can speak to, you know, for ourselves, and we try to reach out to as many people as possible, but feedback from you is really relevant. And without further ado, I hand over to Olga for ESRS 2.
Thank you, Simon. Cross-cutting standards number 2, general strategy, governance, and materiality assessment. An important standards to get familiar with, because it explains the underlying principles which go across all the standards on actually how we should set up the governance, how we need to set up respective strategies and targets and action plans. And again, a very important topic which we discussed, how to start with the risk assessment and materiality assessment to have impact and financial assessments. I'm going to the...
Top.
Oh.
No, this one.
Yes. The ESRS 2 standard has 22 disclosure requirements, again, which are underlying principles of the entire set. That's why it's very important to get familiar with those. They explain, again, principles and disclosure requirements for the general layout of ESRS 1, which Simon just explained. Again, they are not subject, this one is important. ESRS 2 is not subject to rebuttable presumption. So this is the only standard which is exempt, which means that all the preparers have to, or the undertakings have to follow these standards and the guidelines set out in these standards. And this standard also provide context for the topical standards, which we will discuss later on, but were already mentioned before. And again and again, I cannot repeat it less, materiality assessment is the first step in this process. Objectives and overview. Objective of ESRS 2, again, the starting point of it. We talk about the setting up the disclosure requirements of the undertaking, and again, they are of cross-cutting nature. They are of, sorry, I just got, if you could cut it for a second. No, please start. I will restart again from this one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just I'll tell you. Let me collect my thoughts. Let me quickly go through this because it's too much. Yeah. Okay. The ESRS 2 standard sets out the general principles for reporting, and this applies to all standards, all 14 standards, and in particular topical standards of ESRS suite. This explains how undertakings should set up strategy and business model and reflect sustainability, all sustainability elements in it, how governance in relation to sustainability should be set up to make sure that effectively strategy and actions and goals are in place and drive the ambition and agenda of the undertakings towards set sustainability targets. How materiality assessment is performed. This standard lays out in detail the key principles for assessment of materiality, which we spoke before, but again, we're speaking about impact and financial angles of this, and how risks and opportunities are to be assessed. Because we, of course, speak more about risks, but opportunities is also important topic which is brought up, because it's not only reverse size of risk, but also an important development focus. General characteristics. On this slide, you can see the general characteristics and chapters. It explains how reporting should be set up. It again a little bit refers to back how the reporting should be positioned. And again, there are 3 options with a preference given to the first one. So when we have a full round dedicated section on sustainability, which is visible, which is actually will be helped by tagging in the future when technology will come to help us, and similar to financial reporting with XBRL or similar technology, sustainability information will be also tagged for the use of investors and other stakeholders. It explains sectors of the activity and refers to the sector split standards, because you, of course, need to keep in mind what sectors you are, and later on sector-specific standards will come as well, but that will be later. Key features of the value chain, what Simon already mentioned. Please always remember, it is not only own production, for example, or own operations. Standards look into the value chain, and it's very important because it's, again, it's speaking as a preparer, it's one of the most complex topics when it comes to impact and also collecting information reliable and from the first source, primary information, for example. Key drivers of the value creator, again, it speaks how company undertakings create value. There are some specific elements like using approximations, for example, or errors and other elements which gives a practical guidance on how we should report and how we should reflect certain very specific elements in our statements, which is sometimes very close to financial statements from my memory. For example, estimation uncertainty and changes, for example, in the preparations, whether due to changes in the methodology applied or due to errors identified in the previous periods. It also talks about other sustainability reporting pronouncements and general statement of compliance. So these are legal principles which we speak about, so we will have to declare that we are reporting in line with ESRS. And it deep dives in the strategy and business model. So this gives overview of strategy and business model. We need to declare and describe how the views, interests, and of our stakeholders are considered, because that's a very important input, and that also defines, in particular, materiality, but also disclosures which we make. Interaction of impacts of this strategy. So we need to declare and disclose how the impacts which were identified and are connected to the strategy, because undertakings have to prove that their strategy is driving their performance towards certain sustainability goals. And interaction of risks and opportunities, and again the strategy, because all these elements need to be connected, so that puts quite a lot of pressure, in a good sense, of course, to connect all these elements together and to prove to our stakeholders that all these elements serve towards moving the strategy towards a certain targets. Not only we're talking about transparency, please bear in mind, like sometimes we're used to in finance, standards are asking us to go to the sustainability goals set either internationally or in particular by EU, and that's a very important element of it. And our strategies, individual strategies, should cater for this. Going further through specific disclosure requirements, again on governance, on impacts, risks, and opportunities. So we're just walking along the standards. In governance, we have to explain how the governance bodies are organized, what roles and responsibilities they have, how information flows are organized, both how information on sustainability-related topic is fed to the governance bodies and how decisions are taken. So standards lay out quite a detailed set of requirements on this. And sometimes you will see that it might be very close to your general governance and strategy, but it's also proof that sustainability should be very closely intertwined with the general business strategy and the governance of the company. Again, it speaks about incentive schemes and due diligence, which Simon mentioned. So all these elements, which are currently the elements of a sustainable business with a sustainable strategy, are spelled out and with quite detailed requirements. Impacts, risks, and opportunities. The standard explains how the risks and opportunities assessments to be performed. Of course, you can use your methodology and follow the principles which you are either already following or would like to follow, but the general call-out is the same. You have to assess risks, you have to disclose them, and you have to connect your strategy and overall the governance model to those. Going further, again comes back the statements on due diligence. This is a very important, and as Simon mentioned, we not only talk about simple transparency. Transparency is extremely important, but the standards nudge and ask us, quite imperatively, to have a due diligence process. We do need to assess our environment, whether we talk about environmental matters or social matters. We need to screen where the risks are, and we need to translate it into specific actions, which we also have to prove. You will see it coming back in the topical standards that we are asked to also disclose action plans and prove that we walk the talk, which is actually quite a challenge for many preparers, but it's of course a very important move to show that we are all moving towards the same goal. We already spoke about materiality assessment. You can see quite some detail, and you will get the standards, of course, afterwards as the materials. So I will not go through that, but again, we're talking about impact and financial materiality. So this is a very important principle, and I think with this, I will complete my story.
Yeah, but maybe one question to you, Olga, and I think I know the answer myself, but for the people, the audience, what would be your recommendation to get going? Where would you just start reading the first standard and then continue with the last one? Would there be specific material that EFRAG created already that you could advise people to use?
It's a very good question. So EFRAG already provide a lot of assets and materials for the users to help us to get it going. They are still, the standards are still in the status of exposure drafts, but you already can find a lot of materials on the EFRAG page, especially educational sessions, which are very helpful. It's a set of slides explaining much more in detail than we were speaking now, what the standards are about, what's the key elements to watch out for, and also people who were behind, the members of the task force who were actually writing the standards and experts who were analyzing the standards, they are explaining what each standard is about and what are the most important elements. With this knowledge, of course, you can embark on reading the standards, and it's quite a big read, but of course you will already understand the logic. And
for those people who haven't seen any standard yet, is it 50 pages, 100 pages? What is the core content?
Yeah, it depends on the standards, of course. Depends if you take a climate standard, you will see there are quite some pages. The ESRS 1 and 2, they are just around 40 pages on average. So it's quite a lot, but each standard consists of the disclosure requirements section and application guidance. So these are, of course, the most important for you. And those who would like to know more, they can go to the basis for conclusion to understand how, for example, certain articles were decided and which reference points were used by the task force. Again, start with ESRS 1 and 2. They will make you understand how this whole structure works. Also read cover letter, because cover note actually explains interconnections between the standards and also references to all the underlying additional appendixes, because they contain quite a lot of information. For example, how CSRD, for example, certain ESRS are connected to CSRD, for example, or Sustainable Finance Directive. Start with those, and then, depending, of course, what you see material for you, deep dive into the topical standards.
So in summary, go to the EFRAG website, look at the educational material, the video recording of the standard that is being explained. It will give you an executive summary in about half an hour to an hour, depending on one or multiple standards being covered. And with that knowledge, start then read the standard, and you will go through them much faster than if you just come in completely blind. Hey, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Now we are going to deep dive into the topical standards, and the first set is environmental standards, the long-awaited environmental standards, which include 5 key standards. And again, this picture you've already seen, and you will see it again and again. This shows the entire set of ESRS and where environmental standards are positioned. And we speak about climate change, pollution, water and marine resources, biodiversity and ecosystems, and resource use and circular economy. I will go through the climate change, and Simon will present you other environmental standards and the key highlights of them. Environmental standards and climate change standard in particular follow, again, the logic which was already laid out and explained in ESRS 1 and 2. They talk about strategy, governance, materiality assessment as the first starting points. So this is the structure which goes through the entire set of standards. For strategy, governance, and materiality assessments, all the undertakings and preparers have to explain how they set up governance, how they set their strategy, and perform materiality assessments for the climate risks. I guess I cannot imagine even company or undertaking which might not have climate change in their reporting, or might scope it out based on materiality assessments. These are the standards perhaps which will be reported and disclosed by all undertakings. And on this slide you will also see references to other reference points, regulations, and legislation which is a very important element to remember because climate change and this area already has quite a wide range of various regulations around it, and the standards combines them all to bring them in one comprehensive picture. Here you will see the elements of a risk assessment. For those who are familiar with the recommendations of TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, you will see elements familiar to you. The standard speaks about physical and transition risks and assessment of exposure of companies to those risks. And this comes back in the standards very loudly because that's where we all need to start. And of course, based on the risk assessment, we need to build our resilience plans and show how we are going to mitigate and tackle those. Important elements of this standard, which also distinguishes it from other standards, is disclosure requirements related to the transition plan. So entities, the undertakings, are supposed to and asked to have a transition plan, which will include the following elements: alignment of greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and the standards speaks about 1.5 degree scenario, which is the goal of the EU, decarbonization levers, financial resources, and it's a very important element. We have to prove that we walk the talk, that we actually allocate specific investments and resources to the transition plan. We also need to disclose information about locked-in greenhouse gas emissions, make references to the requirements of EU taxonomy, and also show, again similar to other standards, how this is aligned to the overall business strategy and how the whole process is intertwined. So please pay attention to this part. It's a very important element of the standard. The other elements follow, again, the logic of ESRS. They speak about policies, targets, action plans, and resources allocated to it. And here, again, on this slide, you will see what requirements and very detailed requirements the standard has to disclosures of these elements. Again, coming back to the transition plan, please note the standard is not only talking about transparency again, not only disclosure of your actual position. It is talking about how we are going to move to 1.5 degree scenario. It is asking undertakings to develop their strategy in line with this strategy, with this overall EU strategy, and that's a very important element of it. When we talk about the targets, the standards again outlines which exactly targets we talk about. First of all, it asks to have the targets. This is the first very important element. It not only asks to transparently disclose where you are, but we do need to have targets. All climate-related, greenhouse gas emission production targets, net zero targets, and neutrality claims that involve the use of carbon credits. So these are very important, again, elements because all these need to be, first of all, in place, and secondly, disclosed accordingly. On this slide, you can see an example on what this path to the, for example, net zero can look like and which elements it can include. We will share this presentation so that you can see in detail what examples can be, and of course in the application guidance to the standards you can see more detailed instructions on how this should be organized. Next point, and again following the logic of the standards, is the performance measures. So what do we need to disclose? And the standards outlines quite a lot of requirements here. So we do have a lot of metrics and accordingly data points, which will be quite a big challenge even for companies who are already advanced in their carbon reporting. Here we speak about energy consumption and mix, intensity, absolute emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3, total emissions, greenhouse gas removals, credits, and other elements of it. So please, again, pay attention to those. And since we mentioned scope 1, 2, and 3, please note standard requires disclosures of scope 3. This is a big discussion point of all the, quite all, I would say, preparers, because this is emissions of the, outside our own operations, outside our own productions, both upstream and downstream. This always a big challenge point in terms of course, data collection, because it comes from third parties, how we should organize this, how we get primary data, how we avoid estimates used or any other assumptions. So, but standard requires us to disclose it. So again, be very attentive to this part. And going further, other requirements include also financial effects. So we made an assessment of physical and transition risks. We see where they impact our business, but we also need to disclose what the financial impact will it have on our operations. Again, for those who practice TCFD, for example, recommendations, is one of the most challenging points, how we make a reliable and a consistent and comparable disclosure of financial impacts of those risks.
And the link to your financial statements.
And the link to your financial statements, which is a good challenge, but of course, it's a very important point for investors and other stakeholders to see how it will impact your company in line with all the other risks, like credit risks or any other financial risks. And of course, taxonomy, EU taxonomy regulation comes back again. For those who are familiar with it, or ESRS also require disclosures of EU taxonomy, which is of course much more elaborated in the taxonomy itself. We spoke already about the risks, and again, several other slides will outline how all these assessments needs to be done, some specific requirements to the, for example, to the carbon credits, because we know it's quite a sensitive point in any strategy towards net zero, but standard again outlines for all of us how this should be addressed and disclosed accordingly. With that, I think we covered one of the most challenging, and it was the most, again, expected climate change standards. And I will give word to Simon.
Yeah, but only after you answer a question I have to you.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And that is, if you look at Heineken, and you've got very mature ESG reporting, and you win awards and everything. What is your key challenge if you look at this the standard on climate?
Good question. So, of course, we do already a lot of reporting, whether it's in our annual report. We also do disclosures in line with CDP, both climate and also water, which we will speak later on, where we already present a lot of information. But still, Scope 3, as I mentioned, is one of the key challenges. And of course, there is a lot of debate how to get this information, for example, from your suppliers, or for us even from our customers, because they look at our cooling, for example, systems, which you see in the outlets or in the supermarkets. And Scope 3, in my view, financial assessment, which we are doing, but this is still quite a big challenge, because it also needs to be, first of all, aligned fully with your strategy. It needs to be also, of course, reviewed by all your financial colleagues who are in charge of strategy and do make forecasts for the future. This cannot go in parallel, because they have to be woven with each other. And of course, a lot of data points, because again, if you remember, all elements of ESRS need a subject to limited assurance for now.
Yep.
So to make them all audit-proof, to make them auditable, reliable, that's also, I would imagine, a big challenge for all of us.
That's great. So thank you for that. And also, again, I think the key message is also you cannot do this by yourself, really. You need to reach out to your colleagues that are working in risk management, for example, if you're working in a larger company, your people in finance, because you need to assess the financial risks. And also to start talking to your accountant, really, because they should be familiar with all of that. They should help you also to get going. But don't wait until the first year of reporting, because there's a lot to be done for even mature companies like Heineken and Philips, and we really need to put a lot of time and effort into this. And we don't have that much time, because just to reiterate what Gerard said earlier, the year 2024 is the first year where you need to collect the data on, because it's the year that we as listed companies need to report on. If you're not listed, you have got 1 year extra. But we're now in June 2022. Soon it will be January 23, and that's the first year. If you've you're exempted for the first year. You've got 2 years really, but if you don't have any system, policies, procedures and everything, it's a lot of work, and there are many, many standards. And talking about that, I will take you now through 4 other environmental standards, but I will do that at a little bit of a higher pace because not all of the standards are as applicable to everybody like the climate standard is. They're also, if you compare the standards, I would say the climate standard is the most mature one, also because there is a golden standard that is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, against which most companies have been reporting, if you have been reporting on climate change, and CO2 emissions and what have you. Whereas for the others, there's a little bit less standards that would be considered as the golden standard. But let me take you through this. So on pollution, of course, a very big topic, and you just need to open the newspapers and you know that this is a very material topic. Also linked to, for example, biodiversity, and again also the circular economy. So there's a lot of linkages between the different standards. And here you were being asked to talk about pollution and prevention, the other elements in your supply chain again, which will be a little bit more of a challenge because we in Philips know exactly what chemicals we are using and what kind of pollution there is, if any. But how can you make any statements about that in your supply chain, really, with a lot of comfort? There are also, again, just like in the slides that Olga showed, links to different other documents like the TCFD, the CSRD, and others that the EU or other bodies have published. Again, the same structure as we have in the slides of Olga. The disclosure requirements first deal with policies, targets, action plans, and resources. So you can't say, we've got this great action plan and we're working on this with everybody in Philips, but we don't have any resources dedicated to it. So it should all be synchronized quite nicely. And also with regard to performance management, and measurements, what do you really have in place? How well are you doing towards your targets? And we in Philips always set 5-year targets for our ESG program. So you've got a little bit of time to get everything going, but you need to have targets really in order to report on this in line with the pollution standard. And then again, a number of elements that you should disclose: pollutants to air, to water, to soil. I think in itself it's all completely sensible, and if we want to go to a more sustainable world, which we need, they all make sense. But do all the individual disclosure requirements make that much sense, and do they apply to everybody or not? And to what level of detail should you go? And that is where we also ask you kindly to review this and come back to us with your comments. So that was the first standard that I will that I dealt with. So that's ESRS E2. Then we move over to ESRS E3, water. And also in the Netherlands, quite an interesting topic. On the one hand, it's now the summertime and people complain about the droughts already that we have in this great country. But we also had the flooding in Limburg and what have you. So it's a topic that also is coming quite close to all of us here in the Netherlands. And we as a country have quite a large marine history as well. But let's talk about the requirements here. And it's on the one hand water and water use, but also the impact on marine resources. So that could be the North Sea, it could be if you have activities in Indonesia, is there an impact that you have on the oceans over there and what have you. Again, the same structure when it comes to the disclosure requirements: policies, targets, action plans, and resources. And again, assuming that this is a material topic to your company, which in Heineken it definitely is, else we wouldn't have beer. But in Philips it's a little bit less, and we need to deal with, we need to think about how we're going to report on all of this, and whether the rebutable presumption will prevail, or whether we can just claim, it's not a material topic, so we're not going to report on water. Be it that we still always disclose in our annual report, the water consumption, the discharge of water, etc., but at a higher level than the full 9 yards that are being explained in the water standard. And then again, a little bit of an overview of the detailed disclosure requirements, the risks and opportunities. Do you've got specific business activities that have a strong link to water and marine resources, of course, then you need to definitely go all the way in your disclosures. And here, the last slide on the disclosure requirements: water management, intensity performance, so how much water do you consume per million euros of turnover, for example, and are there any marine resource related performance indicators that you have in the company? And again, the standards ask you for all of this, and if you don't have any standards or policies or whatsoever, you need to explain why and when you're going to have all of that. So that was on water, and then at high pace we continue with biodiversity. To my opinion, and I think many in the audience as well, one of the other big societal topics. I think it's climate change, it's biodiversity, and it's social inequality. Those are the big three topics, I think, at society at large. And with regard to the deteriorating biodiversity, the EU has got a number of plans in place. And what is interesting about this standard and some of the other standards as well, they've got strong linkages to the plans of the EU. And the interesting part is those plans don't have any legal status. They are a plan. But the reporting requirements will be mandatory. They're basically a legal requirement. So here, you know, one way or the other, you know, plans and legal requirements have been intertwined and mixed, and we'll see how all of that works out in the nearby future. But with regard to biodiversity, you need to explain really what interactions you have yourself with terrestrial freshwater and marine habitats, ecosystems, and what have you. Again, a very material topic for Heineken and many other companies in the world. For Philips, you know, more in the supply chain than in our own operations, where we've got a limited number of factories really that are quite, you know, or less impactful when it comes to biodiversity than some other companies maybe. So again, the same structure, and you will get a little bit tired of me sounding like a broken record, but it's again strategy, governance, material assessments, and you'll also see that coming back here in this specific standard. But interestingly, we already referred to the climate standard as the one where there is a golden standard, the greenhouse gas protocol. With regard to biodiversity, there is not yet that, you know, surviving standard. Still, there is a disclosure requirement that we have here and that I'm presenting to you. So again, policy targets, action plans, resources, and performance management. And there are a number of elements in the disclosure requirements, like pressure metrics, impact metrics, response metrics, etc., etc. So there's a lot, you can read about it, but there's a lot of references also in those to those emerging standards. So that is where this specific biodiversity standard is coming in. You also need to, again, explain methodologies, metrics used, and that reinforces some of the key messages that Olga and myself are trying to convey to you. If you all add it up, you know, one individual standard is maybe a lot of work, but if you all bundle them, it's an awful lot of work. And you know, every individual one, if you think about a medium-sized company and you need to report on biodiversity, this would take you at least a resource for a specific period of time to get all the data to the table. And again, considering those 1 or 2 years that you have, 2023, 24, it's not a lot of time, so better get started soon. And where you would normally start is with your materiality assessment, because if you are a company like Randstad, and you need to disclose on biodiversity, probably it does not apply that much to you. So if you can already pinpoint that in your materiality assessment, that also means that you don't have to dive into the details of the biodiversity standard, and you can just focus more on the social standards, which make, of course, much more sense than that. And then coming to the last standard, E5, on resource and circular economy, a topic very close to the heart of Philips, because we think the circular economy is very important. We need to decouple economic growth from the use of resources. We're consuming more than one planet at this moment as well, and we see the devastating effects of that. So here again, a number of requirements, and the slide tells you more, and also there's reference to all kinds of other documents in the standard itself. But as I said, you know, we try to decouple economic growth from the extraction of natural resources. Again, policies, targets, action plans, and resources. And if you then look at the disclosure requirements, quite interesting, and a challenge to us in Philips, but also to many others, I think, is that you need to provide a material balance. So what is the weight of the goods and services? Well, services don't have normally a weight, but the weight of your goods that you're purchasing that come into your company. What do you then do with it, and what do you put on the market? And the number of metrics that you need to have there. A lot of details also on waste, you know, hazardous waste and all kind of others. What is being recycled, what not. And I think they make sense as a disclosure requirement, but not everybody, including ourselves, have all our ducks in a row yet to disclose on this. So a lot of work also for Philips, that has already 4 or 5 years history in the circular economy, if not more. And then I think for some of you also a lot of work to be done still. Good guidance in the document itself on, you know, how do you define the material inflows and the outflows and what have you, but worth a read. And with that, I come to the end of the 4 standards that I dealt with, and together we have given you an overview of the 5 standards.
Yes, but I will ask you a question, Simon, because 5 standards, of course, on a very important and high priority topics. For companies starting reporting, it will be overwhelming, especially when they realize that by materiality assessment, everything is applicable for them. From your experience in Philips and maybe general understanding of this, what would you recommend to companies starting with implementation of those?
Yeah, that's a great question, but also a difficult one to answer, because we have been working on this for at least 10, 15 years already in the company. But what I would do, and you would say, assuming that all the 5 standards apply to you, there are companies where this will be the case, but there will be the majority where it will not be the case. So start again with your materiality assessment and come to the conclusion that, for example, maybe all the 5 standards are applicable, but maybe also only the climate standard. And if you do that, you know where to focus. And if you have the bad luck that they all apply to you, well, you better do that materiality assessment in a timely manner, so you can also start organizing your resources to address all of that. Then I would say, if you don't have the expertise yourself and you read the standards, I think it will be a huge challenge to start working on them, because it's far-fetched. And for example, with regard to biodiversity, how many people do have ecologists in their company, and maybe some have, but some don't. So there are quite some experts that you can go to, but solicit that input in a timely manner, because you're not the only company. In the Netherlands, there are about, we estimate, some 3,500 companies that are subject to the CSRD. So there's definitely a big demand for all kind of experts, consultants, accountants, and what have you. So assess what is relevant for you and search for help really to get going. And then during that effort, you will come to the conclusion where the complexity will be. Will it be in your supply chain, for example? But also look at what other companies are doing. I know that Heineken has been doing a great job on biodiversity, for example, and water. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. Look at the number of bigger companies, and maybe Gerard will allude to efforts we can do can take as a Dutch Accounting Standards Board, but also pointing to a number of good examples, because don't reinvent the wheel, really. That is, I think, a very important answer. Hopefully that...
Yeah, cannot agree more. And again, advice, go to a business. You might find out that there is a lot out there already, because operations, sales, HR, they might already do a lot on it, and it will be a matter of combining this all together.
Yeah, and don't forget, we all do this for a more sustainable future, not only for ourselves, but also for the children and everything that will come after us. So thank you so much, and then this is the end of the environmental session. Thank you.
As part of these presentations on the exposure draft ESRS, we're now at the section of the social, where there are 4 standards addressing social matters. As presenter, we have Eva Eijkelenboom, who will go into this in more detail. But Eva, maybe it's good to first introduce yourself.
Thank you, Gerard. My name is Eva Eijkelenboom. I'm working at the Dutch Employers Confederation, and today I will guide you through the topical standards on social topics. Let's start. Well, this picture might be familiar to you. On the 3rd line, you'll see the social standards. There are 4 topical social standards, focusing on workforce, workers in the value chain, affected communities, consumers, and end users. This is also shown on this slide. Well, the background of this social standards is just as all the other exposure drafts provided by EFRAG, is the CSRD, and the basis can be found in Article 19b. And there it says that also undertakings need to disclose information on social factors, and it specifies that information should be provided on equal opportunities, working conditions, and respect for the human rights. And EFRAG built on this CSRD article and made 4 standards out of it, which will be shown on the next slide. Oh, here you see on top of it the social part, divided into the 4 standards, under which there are a lot of building blocks undertakings should provide information about. And well, Here are the division is shown in the yellow numbers, and the yellow parts are actually the parts that are consulted right now and on which we can reflect. That leaves out a whole lot of information that is not under consultation now, but will follow in the future. If you go to the EFRAG site and download the information there, this is not all, more is coming. And of course today we will focus on the information that is under consultation. This part is still under development. What is in the social standards that might be interesting to talk about. First, it's the first standard is also the most comprehensive, as we saw on the last slide, is the own workforce. And within the ESRS, there is a clear division made between own workforce and workers in the value chain, which is the S2 standard. And this is also where there is a difference between the ESRS, the social ESRS, and the GRI framework. Employees is kind of a similar criteria definition, but the non-employees in the workforce, that is where it is different. So the ESRS, they define non-employee workers in the own workforce as part of the own workforce. So those are also part of the S1 ESRS. Within GRI, there is a different division. So if you are already familiar with GRI, this is good to focus on. Here's a difference. And then the S2 standard, those are workers in the value chain, upstream or downstream. So there's a little bit of less disclosure requirements on those workers. Well, and EFRAG chose to divide, to make a different division, to make it more of, for various reasons, legal certainty, to make this clear division between S1 and S2, so it should be more easy to provide the information on it. They made this division based on the data availability and, to minimize incentives to shift employees. This is good to keep in mind the definition of own workforce. Well, and then when we look at the S1 standards, there is this division which can be seen in it, or a variety of disclosure requirements. First, there are some general disclosure requirements, then some focusing on working conditions. Really fun fact there is that there is also an optional disclosure requirement in it. Then there is some disclosure requirements on equal opportunities and some on other work-related rights. And on the next slide, you will see more information on what are those general disclosure requirements and what is asked within the several pillars, I would say, within the own workforce. Well, this might sound familiar also when you have seen the environment, or if you watch the governance explanation. You have to provide information on policies, targets, action plans, and resources, in this case related to your own workforce. And then it will zoom into more of the details of the social, of the own workforce. And it will ask you more about working conditions, like is there training and what kind of training, how is the work-life balance, how is the remuneration, is it fair, and if you can also provide information about the working hours. That one is the optional one, and it asks for if your working hours of the own workforce exceed 48 hours a week. Then there is the questions about equal opportunities. That focuses more on gender, the gender pay gap, discrimination, compensation, the clear focus on persons with disabilities. So all kind of more, equal working conditions or inclusiveness, you could say. And the final part of the S1 standard is more of a miscellaneous part. It asks information about work stoppages. Did those occur in the year? How is the dialogue within the company? How do you are you able to provide feedback? What kind of collective bargaining opportunities are there? Are there human rights issues? Well, you have to think of all kind of disclosures a variety of disclosures on that part. So quite extensive ESRS. The following 3 ESRSs are, as we saw on the one of the slides before, are far smaller. There are only 6 disclosure requirements in each of them. Well, here we see the references made to already existing legislation, for example, the SFDR, the GRI, the United Nations Global Compact. So you see EFRAG try to align as much as possible with all those already existing frameworks. And here it's even on the disclosure requirement level, where did EFRAG seek for alignment and how did they align? Well, this slide comprehends the S2 till 4, so the one on the value works in the value chain, the affected communities and consumers and end users. And again, it asks on strategy, implementation, and how you perform in practice. And then you again have to provide information, or are there policies, and if there are, how can you summarize them? How do you engage with the people addressed in the standards? What are the channels to raise concerns? Are there targets? How do you take action, and what do you do to mitigate risks or negative effects? And again, more of these, more is to come on these standards. So these are only a small part of what will be applicable, or what we think will be applicable. And then I'm already at the end of this high-level overview of the social standards. And well, these social standards and also the large value chain aspect in it also ask or brings up the questions, well, how does that work in the due diligence perspective? Well, due diligence, part of the standards also related to other ESRS, and here you see that EFRAG also chose to or integrated the alignment with OECD due diligence, and here you see how the disclosure requirements will follow the specific steps to perform due diligence within the undertaking. And well, more is to come, since there are still developments also within European legislation on due diligence. And I think I'll leave it to that for this high-level overview, and you can watch more on the educational sessions provided by EFRAG on their site, specific on these topics.
Eva, a very clear overview of the 4 social standards. What do you see as the most challenging parts of these proposals? What's something that's new and needs to be put the most effort into?
I think the social standards are new in itself, or for most companies they will be relatively new, more new than, for example, thinking about or reporting on environmental issues or governance issues. So those are relatively, I would say, the most new, or in that case then difficult, since you're not aware of them. And within the social standards, I think the value chain part is the most difficult. Most of the information on workers, you have it within the undertaking. Maybe it's not connected, and it will require effort to provide the information, also within the undertaking or within the group. But for the whole value chain and receiving all the information necessary to provide, and also being able to make policies and see how that works in the whole value chain and getting really a grasp on that one, that will be the most.
Yeah, and that also includes, if I understand it correctly, that even the definition of your own workforce is not just who are legally your employees and your payroll, but also direct contractors who people are effectively directly engaged.
Yep.
And you may have more limited information about those non-legal employees, so to say, than about the people that are directly on your own payroll, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, true. That's and that's within own workforce. So that's a difficulty within the S1 standard, which is also the most comprehensive of the four. But that's it's something to work on. I would say.
And then, if you say to work on, what would your advice be? Where to start as a company on the social section?
I would start start at S1 at the own workforce and try to find out which information you already have and if it's and where it is within the company and if all the systems are aligned or what should be done. So first a little bit of research, I would say, to if you start there, and if this is all new to you, then I would then first start by reading actually watching the educational video by EFRAG. I think that will be the start there.
Okay, that's very clear. This brings us to an end on the social section. Maybe one final comment. I hope that the people that have the extra workload on sustainability reporting are not going to exceed the 40 hours per week, because then you would need to report on that, and that's a key social factor. So that's nice to consider in that perspective as well. So thanks for attending this social section, and also welcome you to the other sections of the presentations on the ESRS. As part of the recordings on the ESRS standards as part of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board and EFRAG outreach event, this is the part that relates to the governance standards, where we'll be addressing the two specific governance standards as part of the overall ESRS structure. We have here Eva Eijkelenboom, who will doing the presentation. Maybe you can briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Eva Eijkelenboom. I'm working at the Dutch Employers Confederation, and today I will guide you through the topical standards of ESRS on governance. Let's start.
Yes.
There are only two standards on governance, so it should be a short video. This picture might be familiar to you. On the fourth line, you see the topical standards on governance. And there are two standards on governance, as I just mentioned. The first one going into governance, risk management, and internal controls. And the second one is seeing on business conduct. Just as all the other ESRS, the basis of the topical standards of EFRAG is the CSRD, and specifically Article 19b. And there it says undertaking should provide information about governance factors, and then more specific, including information about the role of the undertakings, administrative management, and supervisory bodies, including with regard to sustainability matters, business ethics, political engagement, the management and quality of relationship with business partners, including payment practices, and the internal control and risk management systems in relation to the undertaking's reporting process. And those, this article and these requests are then translated into two topical standards. The first one, G1, the orange block underneath, and the second one, the purple, on business conduct. And the specific coloring of the slide is a bit odd, but the business conduct relates to the orange information request from the CSRD. But we will it will be clear when you read through the topical standard. what is a bit different in the topical standards on ESRS compared to the one on the social and the environmental is that the G1, so the topical standard on governance, is actually broader than ESRS 2, covering also governance disclosure requirements. So that's a difference. The difference can be found in the fact that G1 covers, as it says, overall governance, whereas ESRS 2 relates to governance on sustainability matters. And the reason for it is that in order to be able to understand the impact an undertaking can make on sustainability, you should have a clear picture on the overall governance. And therefore, G1, the topical standard, includes overall governance. Of course, there are also governance aspects to be found in the topical standards on S and E, and mostly they're related to, well, for example, policies or requirements, obligations that certain bodies within the undertaking have. So governance, yeah, is intertwined in all standards. When we specifically look at the G1 standard, we see that well, alignment that is aligned with, for example, GRI and SFDR and the accounting directive. So, and that's also not that strange, since governance is already a part of your reporting process. You already provide information on it. And well, what kind of information do you have to provide according to the draft on governance? You have to provide a little bit information on your structure, your overall governance structure. Provide information about are there codes applicable? How do you evaluate processes? How do your internal controls look like? What's your risk management? So more of these kind of information aspects, and a little bit on how does that then work in practice. So, for example, what's the performance rate, the attendance rate of supervisory board meetings or something. Those are indicators that should also be mentioned in your sustainability statements on the governance aspect. Well, then there is the second part, the business conduct part, G2, and there you have to also say something about, well, strategy, implementation, and performance, similar setup as the G1 standards, but here you have to go into details on your business conduct culture. What do you aim for? How does that then? How is it implemented in your undertaking? So, when we specifically look at anti-competitive behavior, the prevention and detection of corruption, you also have to say something about. Well, in your performance matters, be open, for example, about lobbying activities, especially interesting for me, of course. But also how is it within your undertaking on training? How do you train your people on anti-corruption or anti-bribery? Are they aware? And no. All kind of several payment practices. You have to be open about it and provide information in the sustainability report. And well, that was really short on only two topical governance standards. Most of it's probably not that new. But now also part of the ESG requirements.
Eva, thank you for a very clear presentation. And as you just mentioned, a lot of these elements we are already familiar with, although maybe large unlisted companies, for them it's a bigger step as for all of the topics. But nevertheless, what would you see as the biggest challenge when adopting G1 and G2 from a reporting and governance perspective?
Well, I think, and since this is a recap of the outreach event, I can also reflect a bit on the discussion we had there during the day. This led to a discussion on the relevance of the information asked, and there was a debate on it. On the one hand, people said, well, all the listed companies, those who are part of the NFRD or under scope of NFRD or under scope of the Dutch Corporate Governance Code, for them this shouldn't be new, and probably they report on it already, or at least have the systems in place, and they thought about it and have policies on it. But a large group of companies now, which will now be in scope of CSRD, isn't part of those, or isn't obliged to report under the NFRD or follow the disclosure requirements of disclose about the Corporate Governance Code, and for them it might be relevant to put it in law, and it might help for them. So the relevance of the standard, it was debated about. It's different for different groups of companies. So and if you then ask what's the most difficult or where to start, then it's probably the most easy to start at the G1, the overall governance part, and then look into the specifics.
Yeah, and that means, as you mentioned, for the large companies, you mentioned, well, they could best start with the G1, but what other tips would you give them, or should they be looking at what the listed companies are already reporting, or what other tips would you have to make a good start?
Yeah, since governance and reporting on governance isn't new, it's helpful, or it might be helpful to look into what other companies who currently are reporting on a lot of governance issues report on right now, and how do they report on it. And especially, a tip also in that is look at also the sectors in which, the same sector as which are you active in, that sector might be of the most relevance for you to see. So look at the biggest companies, or the large listed companies who currently are reporting a lot, to see what you can learn from them, and then preferably listed companies in your sector.
And translate that then to your own situation, because a family-owned company is in some
totally
governance aspect quite different from a listed company, but at least using that as a starting point and translating that to your own specific situation. Yeah,
true. It might give you ideas on what to report, on how to report, and of course you have to translate it to your own company to make it more entity specific, and in that way also valuable information for the people who are reading your sustainability statements.
Okay, thank you, very clear. This brings us to the end of our governance section as part of these ESRS related presentations. Thanks for watching, and please also watch the other sections. Thank you. Thank you for watching these presentations on the CSRD and all of the ESRS standards with the cross-cutting, the environmental, the social, and the governance standards. If you want to obtain more information, you can either go to the website of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, where you can find all of the materials of the outreach event, including the Q&As that were asked during the event and that you can make yourself familiar with. You can also go to the EFRAG website. There you will find all of the actual standards, the survey for the public consultation, as well as the educational sessions. If you have any feedback that we can incorporate as a Dutch Accounting Standards Board in our comment letter, or any other questions or feedback that you may have, please send an email to the Dutch Accounting Standards Board at secretariaat@rjnet.nl. Then once more, thanks a lot for watching, thanks for your attention, and hope to see you soon again. Thank you.